We'll go ahead and start right at 6 o'clock. So if you want to grab your water and just relax a little bit, we'll be with you in 2 minutes. All right, at 6 o'clock. I want to welcome you and welcome you back for those of you who have come each month. Some of your names are very familiar, so thank you for coming back. My name is Judy Fredericks. I'm the Wellness Liaison from the Center for Clinical Wellness, and this is our January workshop on perfectionism, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I am very happy to have a co-host today, Dr. Ami Shah. She's the lead for the Rush coaching programs and an associate professor here at Rush. So hi to everybody and welcome. To go ahead and get started. Just as a reminder that we come to every month, both at noon and at 6 o'clock, with a different topic. Next month, we will be talking about eating your way to wellness. So if anybody is a foodie, this might be good. Or if you are struggling with being too much of a foodie, this might be helpful as well. We go all the way through April, so hope to see you back again. And with each of these, they are recorded and they are posted on the Rush Wellness website. So you're able to go back last 2 years actually and look at the different topics. So, and if you have ideas for topics, please don't hesitate and give us an email and let us know what you would like to see or hear, and be happy to do that. All right, just like we always start out, I would like to do a little grounding exercise for those of you who've been running around, grab something to eat, you finally sit down, right? Take a moment. So if you wouldn't mind sitting back in your chair, putting your feet on the ground, hands in your lap. Take 3 deep breaths, in through your nose, out through your mouth. Three deep breaths are enough to change your neural pathway. And so that's kind of a good thing when you're feeling a little stressed or a little rushed around. You can always give your brain kind of a universal sign by putting your hand on your chest when you're doing those 3 deep breaths to bring down that cortisol. And then if that isn't enough, if you're still kind of struggling with anxiousness or feeling overwhelmed, take that right hand underneath your left arm, press on those ribs. Take your left hand up over your shoulder, press on that muscle that you would just love to have somebody massage, right? And do the 3 breaths again. If you partner any of those with looking outside during the daylight, or some might have on your wall a picture of the outside where you have that green gray, that's another very calming sign to your brain. So what you're doing is just helping yourself calm, moving the emotions away, being able to focus a little better, and being able to relax. So whichever thing that you use, go ahead and do that for yourself right now. And then what I'd like you to do is soften your gaze or close your eyes and just listen to my voice. Settle in and think of a person who's been kind to you. It could be a grandparent, a teacher, a parent, a friend, even a beloved pet. Allow yourself to feel this kindness, this warmth. Imagine this person is wishing you well, sending you a blessing, gazing at you with understanding, kindness, and compassion, possibly saying these words to you. May you be safe and protected. May you be healthy. May you be held in kindness and compassion. Take 3 deep breaths and then stretch. So your hands out in front of you to stretch that back. Hands over your head, grab one wrist, pull to the side. Grab the other wrist, pull to the other side. Put your hands behind you to open up your chest, because a lot of us sit kind of crunched over our computers. Take a deep breath in this position. Bring your hands around and just shake them out. And we're ready to start. All right. So for today, our objectives are going to be to actually define perfectionism, because maybe you are not a perfectionist. Maybe there's some other things going on that you might like a little better. We're also going to dabble in imposter syndrome. You've all heard that probably. We want to get an awareness of our own control limits and our self-worth, what makes us tick, what kind of boundaries we put up in front of ourselves. Gaining knowledge of the good and the bad of it, that there is some good things that happen when you have that perfectionism as a kind of a goal, but there are also health implications that we'll go over, as well as we want to be able to leverage it for success. If this is something that you do, why not flip it so that you're successful? And then finally, just kind of reviewing some of the resources that are available to you. You know that having high standards is a good thing, and that's probably how you got here, right? Striving for excellence is a concept that we want you to explore a little bit, that you have a good work ethic and a strong character. So we want to soften some of the language of perfectionism, because not everybody's a perfectionist. And it's important to emphasize perfectionism is both good and bad. Okay. All right, Dr. Shah.
Hi all. So I wanted to talk a little bit about perfectionism. Often we've been told this at some point in our lives, and sometimes when we are quite young, and we've sort of incorporated it as part of our personality. And sometimes it can even become sort of like a badge of honor, because it means that we're doing a good job if we're aiming for perfection. And when we said, and when we've really incorporated that into our personality, into being a good thing, I think overall we think that it means that we're performing at a really high level, or that we have a lot of success, or we put out very high quality work and we want to be perfect. And this is the thing, perfectionism doesn't actually mean that. And you can see from the definition that I put on the screen, the definition of perfectionism is actually a personal standard, attitude, or philosophy that demands perfection and rejects anything else. And so that second part is hard, right? It demands perfection and rejects anything else. And so here's the problem. Who decides if something or someone is perfect? And we do, but we often don't think we are. We often are measuring it against some other standard or against somebody else, or sometimes it's even poorly formed and we don't really know what we're measuring against. And when it's totally open to interpretation like that, we often set completely unattainable ideals. And if you're a quote unquote perfectionist, you'll by default never be good enough. And there's always going to be something else who can do what we do, perhaps better in our eyes, or they just do it a little bit differently, and somehow that's better. And when we never measure up, we can really start to feel terrible, and imposter syndrome can start to sneak in there. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more later on in the talk. But you can see how if you're always worried that your work is never good enough because we haven't set what that goal is, and we put our work out there, then people might find out the real you isn't that great or isn't that perfect.
to be able to recognize it and how it shows up in yourself or those around you, you can listen for a couple of red flags. Like how much do you hear should statements, like I should have known, I should never have done that, kind of criticisms of what happened instead of accepting and learning. You make a mistake, you feel like you couldn't survive. You wouldn't want anyone to know that you made that mistake. And even if you prepare, you start to question yourself about knowing or thinking or believing that you wouldn't do well. So perfectionism actually creates a fear of making mistakes. So over time, the bad part about this is that belief can go into feeling that you're not as capable as others, even though you're very high performing. So check in when it comes where this all comes from. Competition can most of the time come from inside. You want to think about as you were growing up, were you celebrated for being the best? Were you shamed if you were mediocre or average? Consider your culture, your family values. Think back even into the primary school days, your family rules. Non-conformance would result in being shamed. A lot of times the oldest of siblings are the ones who become most perfect because that's what all the siblings look up to, and that's what the adults demand. So you want to think about how you do in a project, when you're in a group project. Do you end up taking over the project because you believe you can improve the overall standard of it? And was it at the expense of your time and your sleep, and was it worth it? Sometimes perfectionists might feel it was. Believe it or not, perfectionists are procrastinators. So if you know somebody who is a procrastinator, but then when they finally do it, they will put everything into it and it'll come out beautiful. The problem with that is they wait until everything feels perfect to be able to do it. And that's hard to do if that's the cycle that you're in, because it is exhausting that you do that. The other thing is there is that health implications part. So the need of the perfect condition before starting to work, that's a lot of pressure. The view of really pushing past diminishing returns, endless hours, health issues, does it really make a difference? And you want to just question that for yourself. And then that deep-seated unhappiness that has a lot to do with inner struggles and that inner talk that you might hear yourself saying. The other things is things that are not sustainable. This kind of stuff, you just can't keep going. So you're kind of going up and down and up and down. And so there's a study that came out in 2010 that showed perfectionists had more trouble falling asleep and staying asleep because they were worried about failing and being labeled as failures. And you know, insufficient sleep is known to increase the risk of diabetes, some cancers, heart attacks, stroke, and early Alzheimer's. If you've tuned into any of the other talks, a lot of times I'll talk about sleep cycles. And if you wake up between 3 and 3:30 in the morning, a lot of times that's in between a sleep cycle. And the first thing you think about is what you're worried about. And so if you're a perfectionist, this is a continual cycle that you go to bed worried about it. You have a hard time falling asleep. You wake up in the middle of the night worried about it. And then you again have a hard time falling asleep. So you don't do a lot of good sleep quality. And I know there's some mattresses out there that monitor your sleep quality and some watches that monitor your sleep quality. So you can actually track yourself and you find this. What was interesting was that Lady Gaga admits that she has a lot of unhappiness around her perfectionist tendencies. So one of the examples she gave is every time she hears Edge of Glory, she hears errors in it. And so it's hard for her to listen to her songs because she knows right where it could have been better in her mind. So imagine that even at that level, having that level perfectionism and being unhappy about some of these major hits, whether they're movies, songs, whatever they are, productions, always knowing right where that error is that you wished you would have done differently. So it happens to everyone. All right. There are actually 11 ways that you can tell if you're a perfectionist. And so what you want to do is think about some of these things that are listed and think about how many of those out of the 11 address how you feel. And if you would mind putting that in the chat. So go ahead, open up the chat or even unmute if you have any thoughts on any of these. And let us know how many you have out of the 11.
I know, Judy, at some point yep, I agree. I've checked all 11, and some people say that in the chat too.
Somebody can check all 11. All right. 6, 9. I don't know if anybody's on the just on their phone, but I'm just going to read off some of the numbers. 7s, 8s. So pretty high, more than half. I'm wondering if it's all of the time, or depending on the project or the thing that you're doing or the day, it might be more some days than the other. You're more tolerant of yourself on some days than the other days. Most of the time. Okay. And if you ever think that that's getting in your way, that having that high of expectations of yourself, feeling that success is never enough, that you do want to think about what would life be like if that wasn't all the time. Would there be some relief? Would you find a release in that, and being able to not have that pressure, not have that up and down that you have in that perfectionism type of thing? So there's actually different traits. So you can keep adding in there for any of you that are on and haven't done that. Keep going ahead and adding. And yes, Dr. Todd, that was great that there are some people that live without feeling these things. They might feel specific about doing things, or they might spot mistakes that other people don't see, but some of these things are not part of their vernacular. Right, so moving on. Dr. Shah is going to talk a little about the traits of perfectionism.
Yeah, and so, the checklist is very helpful in helping us sort of define how that can look, and like, do we hit these check boxes? But that checkbox, sort of put in another way, is sometimes when we have a task to perform, we have this goal, or we've set a goal for ourselves, and part of the problem with perfectionism is often that goal is very ill-defined. Like I mentioned earlier, it can be based on society standards, it can be based on someone else's standards, and when we're not specific about what that goal is, we often set very unrealistic standards. And these are expectations that can probably never be met. And so when we have an ill-defined goal or an impossible goal, it's really hard for us to start. We know inherently that we're not going to be able to meet that goal. And who wants to start something when we know that we're going to fail? So we can have that fear of failure and procrastination that makes it hard to even get started on working towards whatever that thing was that we set. And then what can happen is we can only focus on the results. We don't focus on the journey. What can we learn along the way? What can we learn about ourselves along the way? What are some problems that we'll see that will come up? How can we problem solve? All we're focused on is what that end goal is and accomplishing that goal by any ways possible. And when that happens, we can become very highly critical when we fail to reach those results. And this cycle can repeat itself over and over again. And so we can sometimes see this playing out in different components of our lives. We can sometimes see it playing out in just certain projects, or maybe we found a way to overcome that. But this can be sort of how the cycle of procrastination and the cycle that can lead into this perfectionism can really influence and impact us. And so sometimes the first step in trying to combat that perfectionism is asking ourselves, are those goals that we're setting for us realistic? Are they actually attainable? And what happens? What's so great about achieving that goal? What would be different about us or about our lives that we think it may be if we reach that goal?
A lot of good questions to kind of do some self-searching about that. And there's actually a couple types of perfectionisms, and they're both the good and bad of it. So there's that self-oriented perfectionism. That's that internal drive. When I ask, like, where's that competition coming from? This is that self-oriented, that you're looking for that absolute perfection. You're vulnerable to anxiety, rumination, and burnout, and you probably do not sleep well. You have a high level of anxiety and worry. There's also the socially prescribed perfectionism, and this is the one where you believe others expect you to be perfect. It's really not you. You are putting pressure on yourself because you believe other people want you to be perfect. And that's a lot of times the cultural or the way you grew up in your family. People expected you to be perfect. The hard part about that is with that anxiety and with that pressure comes things like headaches, irregular sleep patterns again, and eating disturbances. So kind of think about where's that coming from. And then finally, that other-oriented perfectionism, and this is the most common, that you expect others to be as perfect as you. And this makes it really hard with your relationships because most people can't live up to what your belief is of perfectionism. It makes it tough when you're working as a group in a team. It makes it tough when you're in a relationship. And so you really have to have some good conversations about any pressures that others might feel because you have that expectation of them to be a perfectionist along with you.
And so when we are thinking about perfectionism, we wanted to make sure to address too that perfectionism isn't all bad, right? It's part of what's made us successful, right? It's part of why we've gotten to the place that we've gotten to, why we've had the successes that we've had in our lives, that we've been able to accomplish where we are. And honestly, that drive and that strive to try to continually improve ourselves is healthy, right? But perfectionism taken to the extreme, as we sometimes can do if we're not mindful about that goal setting, if we're not mindful about, do I really want this? Do I really need this? Can be really dangerous to our health in all the ways that we were talking about before. So I just wanted to address that, like, we often just want to feel different. We don't want to just feel that pressure anymore without throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Um, in addition to that, the idea about social cues, a lot of us got our confirmation about how we were doing from the groups around us. And during COVID and the quarantining, that we actually cultivated the feeling of isolation, that was a very common feeling because we were at home, we were on Zoom. Not everybody was at the medical center seeing each other every day. And so having no social cues, wearing masks that hide your smile, that you're not getting that immediate response to know how you're doing. So you start to think, oh, well, maybe they don't think that I'm doing this right. And you start to do things just to kind of change your thinking because of the response that you're not getting. Even being on Zoom, you can't be really spontaneous on Zoom, and it can be exhausting depending on how many Zoom meetings you are on a day, how many lectures you go to that are on Zoom. And my hope is that you would take at least about every 20 minutes, you would do that 20-20-20 rule where you'd take a break at 20 minutes, you'd actually look outside about 20 feet away for about 20 seconds, and just allow your brain to have a different visual and then come back and be able to be more focused and more involved in what's going on. So just being able to be aware of what the social cues and what COVID has done to our messaging between each other is really important because you might be the same person, you might be functioning at the same high level, but because you were not getting feedback, you were worried that you had to go up another level, push yourself another notch to be more perfect.
And Judy and I were talking about that. It's really interesting with COVID that, generationally, some of the younger people, some people have also, with having that lack of social cues with COVID, were able to pull back and figure out, well, does this really matter to me? Is this really important to me? And for some people, COVID and Zoom meetings and all of that kind of stuff, and not being in the office may have allowed people to dial back their perfectionism because it gave them a chance to reflect on what's important to them. So two sides of every coin, like everything.
Absolutely. Thank you. So you've heard the term the swan effect, and you look around, and this is part of this whole thing we're talking about. you look around to get some cues from others, and they seem like they're doing okay. And maybe they seem like they're even doing great. And you think, well, what's their secret? I'm working as hard as I can, and it just doesn't seem like I'm achieving at that level. And so the swan effect is really true with all of us, that we're trying so hard to juggle everything so well and to succeed, that under the level of the water, we're paddling as fast as we can. And a lot of people do not see just what's truly going on. So you never know how hard it is for a person to succeed, because you don't see below that level of the water where they're paddling so hard. And so it's always important to be kind, because you don't know what they're up against and what their challenges are and how hard it is for them even to reach the level that they're at. Now, here's a little bit of a test. Think about your internal dialogue. Do you question yourself based on what you see of others? And do you acknowledge that you don't know the whole story? And that's a really important piece there. If there was somebody near to you, or if you could put it in the chat, you go into the chat under individual and pick somebody and say something nice to them in the chat. So go ahead, open up the chat, or you can use your phone and send a compliment to somebody. And just, it could be, it was great to see you today. I hope you had a good day. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. I love you. I'm glad we're friends. Whatever it is, just something nice to somebody. And go ahead and put that in. Give you a couple seconds to do that. All right, so hope you had a chance to do that. And then how did that feel? My hope is that as you were doing it, you might have smiled a little bit. You might have thought about the person who's going to receive it. They didn't expect it. They got this nice message, unexpected. And maybe they even are going to respond back, which would give you that second endorphin release, which would be a wonderful thing. So even just having a goal of giving one compliment a day and being able to set down that neural pathway of having that endorphin release when you say a compliment, it will happen sooner and quicker every time you do it. And so that's a really good thing. I mean, just think about your work environment or your study environment. If that's what you did, guys gave compliments to each other, it would just, be kind of a pretty cool thing. Now, if they gave you feedback, did anybody get a response back? You could unmute and share that. If you got a response back, did you accept their appreciation, or did you say, oh, that's just what anybody would do? A lot of times with compliments, we have a hard time accepting compliments. We kind of minimize them. And what that does is that actually blocks the other person from feeling good. And so it's so important that you accept the compliment, you thank them for saying something, thank you for acknowledging. And that also gives them that good feedback about they'll want to do a compliment again. And so that's kind of a nice feeling. Now, the question here is, what if you said the same thing to yourself? The compliment you just gave to somebody else, what if you said it to yourself? Does that voice in your head negate the compliment? Were you judging if you would be worthy of that compliment, even though you gave it to somebody else? If we don't acknowledge our own success, it denies us that endorphin release that's so important, but it also blocks our energy restoration. And just think about, again, Lady Gaga or any of the things that happen when somebody is judging things that they've done. And in fact, on the other side of that coin, when you show gratitude, when you offer a compliment, if you were to see an MRI of that, your brain would be lighting up in just such wonderful colors, because it's just very positive, very pleasant, and releasing those endorphins, just a very good feeling. So of course, we want you to be able to hear the compliment. We want you to be able to hear your own self-talk when it's positive, to be able to start your day that way instead of grabbing your phone. Say things that are positive to yourself, like we did when we opened up this talk this evening, and be able to give yourself some of those positive affirmations to get that flowing, so you actually do set yourself up for a good day. All right, so now this is good for you. If you have some paper in front of you and you can put the 9 dots on your paper, you might have seen this before. And the goal is to connect all 9 dots without lifting your pen. All right. While you're doing that, I would like you to pay attention to your patterns of emotions, body sensations, and thoughts. Do you feel yourself tensing because it's a competition, a contest? If somebody gets it right away, please unmute and let us know. But be aware of what happens in your body when you're doing this. And this is something that you can probably track for a lot of things that happen during your day, that your emotions shift, that your body becomes tense, that your thoughts become more negative because you're not getting it as fast as you want, or somebody else might be challenging you and getting it faster, and you don't want that to happen. So those are things that you could actually kind of watch for yourself and be able to slow down that pattern of perfectionism, anxiety, overwhelm, all of those things. And you can continue to work on this as we go along.
And so we've talked about sort of how perfectionism can lead to imposter syndrome. But of course, what I like to do is always define everything first, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And imposter syndrome was actually first described back in 1978 in High Achieving Women. And it's basically, in essence, you can read it here, but the belief that our success is due to luck instead of our skills. And we have this perpetual feeling of reposing, and it can be very uncomfortable because it feels like we're always just one domino away from being exposed as a fraud, that we're not really that good, that we actually don't know what we're doing. And one thing that I want to make clear is that at least half of imposter syndrome can be secondary to external cultural forces, right? It can be secondary sometimes to women being told that, their leadership style is wrong, and somebody else, and a male may have that same leadership style and it's okay. This often comes up in DEI work, right? When you don't see anyone that looks like you in leadership, you may be getting those microaggressions or even macroaggressions of you don't belong, right? And whatever that looks like, and however that looks like, if you're a father and you talk about what it means to be a father in medicine and nobody else talks about that, you may also feel like you're not doing the same job as anyone else and that you're not within the group and you're different than other people. And so when we do have some of those micro or macroaggressions, that of course can lead to this sense of imposter syndrome, and those are external forces. However, there are some internal components to this imposter syndrome, and that's what I want to talk about today, because those external those external forces need to be changed. But until we're really clear about how we think about ourselves internally, we don't have sort of the ability to change those external things. And again, everything's two sides of the same coin. Sometimes imposter syndrome can be helpful because that feeling of knowing that we don't know something can help push us to learn new things and grow. But like anything, when we take it to the extreme, it's not good for us anymore. So, hit the next slide, Judy. So what is internal imposter syndrome? And to me, it's perfectionism. And as you saw on that previous slide where we had that runner trying to get up the hill, if we've set a goal that we know we can't achieve, and we've done that out of that sense of imposter syndrome, or we've done that out of that sense of perfectionism, then we can see how that can lead to internal imposter syndrome, because we can never really hit that goal that we're trying to hit. We can never hit that peak. We can never be perfect.
Well, staying with that imposter syndrome, the pandemic has also had something to do with increased feelings of the imposter syndrome. The working from home, the online classes, it really did create a feeling of needing to work harder to succeed. And for those who believe in the perfectionism and the whole imposter syndrome cycle, to think about how things go when you're assigned a project or you're in a new rotation. You think about how that works for you, that you get anxiety, you begin to procrastinate, and you're over preparing. You're trying to do everything that you can to protect so that things go right. Or you wait until you think everything is exactly right. And so you're waiting closer to the deadline and you have a lot of anxiety around there. When you do complete the project, there is, because you've had all this anxiety, all of this, cortisol increase, you've had all this stuff going on with you, and then you complete the project, then you have that a brief release and you have a sense of accomplishment, just a momentary sense of accomplishment, because what comes next in that cycle is that rationalization. I was lucky. It just happened to work out. Somebody else would have done a better job. And just like Lady Gaga, you hear the mistakes, you see the mistakes, you think about what you should have done differently. And then you have that feeling of self-doubt. And then that imposter syndrome falls in because you start to feel like a fraud. And before you know it, the next project is assigned, the next rotation comes along, and it starts again. And this is exhausting to do this over and over, to have this be your life. And so really think about how you're able to know that this cycle is happening and identify what's happening. As far as procrastination, you might need to use a calendar or sketch out kind of a map of how this project's going to go for you with the dates on it, that when you do the accomplishment, to celebrate with friends, to be able to go out and talk about what this was like for you. Even if you could do it along the way would be even better, not waiting till the final end. And then thinking about, you get congratulated or acknowledged by your peers, and then you think, oh, I was just lucky. You worked hard. You deserve feeling good. And so allow yourself to take on that feeling and to feel that feeling, not to push it away, not to deny yourself that endorphin release that you really need. Your brain needs that break, your body needs that feeling. It's so important, so that when you get to that part about that self-doubt, that you can actually push that away, to say, no, I did it. I made it through this time. I know the next thing that's coming up is going to be hard, but I can do it because I just did this one. And I know I'm going to use these same tactics and I'm going to do it again. And so you're really doing a lot of good self-talk.
Yeah, and Judy hit a lot of important points about why these things are important and why we should talk about them. But one of the things that I'll tell you personally is helpful for me, and it really gave me the drive to focus on this and to work on improving this for myself and improving my own perfectionism and imposter syndrome, was when I sort of zoomed out and thought about the big picture of my life, and this may be for everyone else as well, is that, and it goes to what you think about why we're here and what we're doing. But for me, it's purpose, right? What is my purpose here? What is the reason that I do the things that I do? And this imposter syndrome and perfectionism was getting in the way of what that personal purpose was for me, and the enjoyment of our lives. Like, how do we enjoy and really lean into the time that we have here on earth? And we know that when we work on that for ourselves, and we're examples of that, of working on our imposter syndrome, working on our perfectionism, it can be really important in belonging too. If we're always feeling like we're an imposter or that we have to be perfect, how can we ever truly belong? And that's important for everyone here at Rush, right? How do we belong to this institution? How do we change things? How do we make people feel like they can have a seat at the table? You may have a great idea or a great way in which to improve the care of our patients, or some mechanism about how this institution works. But if you don't feel like you belong internally, if you don't feel like what your ideas are good, if you don't feel like they're perfect, if you feel like you'll be found out, then it's really hard for you to bring that to the table, which may be important for everyone around us. And of course, it's protective against burnout. And we talk so much about burnout and what do we do about it? And we do modules and we do this and we do that. But it's so individual for us, right? My purpose is not what everyone else's purpose is, but my purpose is what keeps me coming to work every day. It's what keeps me taking care of patients in the best way possible. And of course that waxes and wanes, but this is, besides all the health effects of perfectionism and burnout, is why it's so important for us to do this work for ourselves.
Totally agree. And I think the idea about your why is so important, that even it's important enough to put the statement on the wall in front of you where you work, on your bathroom mirror, wherever, so that you can look up and be reminded on good days as well as bad days, What is your why? What are your values? Why are you doing what you're doing? And it's so important to be able to have something like that remind you, because it gives you that extra energy that some days you really need to keep going, because it's tough and it continues to challenge you. And so definitely be able to think about that purpose, think about joy instead of happiness. Joy is when time just flies. You're doing something and just time flies. Have you ever been with a patient or a client where you weren't aware of how much time went by, or procedures happened and they just went so well, and you felt the flow of things happening? That's the real thing that you go after, that joy and that flow. Happiness is just so fleeting and so hard to get. If you think about the flow and you think about the joy, you think about your why, you'll really be able to kind of move away from perfection to a level of approaching excellence. And that's really where we want to kind of shift to a little bit.
And with this next slide, I just wanted to normalize this. And this is, I'm a surgeon, so I'm going to talk about surgery things a little bit, but I just wanted to normalize how common this is for everyone around us. There was a study that actually came out of Rush here, and included in multiple academic surgery programs, and they looked at what the rate of imposter syndrome was in residents. And when we back up and take a long view for a little bit, these are people who have gotten into medical school, what a huge accomplishment there, have gotten into a surgical residency and are doing well, right? By anyone's stretch of the imagination, they're winning at life, right? They found their purpose, they're going to help people, and they've been very successful at it. And looking at these residents, 76% of these residents had significant or severe imposter syndrome. And this was regardless of age, regardless of sex, regardless of how far along they were in training, regardless of what their scores were in medical school or in surgical residency. So even when they excelled in these standardized tests, they still had significant imposter syndrome that people were going to find out that they were actually dumb. And so we all can feel this to a certain extent. And when we don't intentionally take the time like we are today to talk about that and see what these things mean to us, we can see what kind of effects they can have on us.
Thank you. Hopefully the little bit of that data is really helpful to you to kind of think about how global that whole idea is. So we want to talk just a couple minutes about your brain. I've mentioned cortisol and epinephrine before, and just that psychosocial stress really has a lot to do with how we respond and how we react to it. And so to think about the amygdala and your fight, flight, freeze center, that's your reptilian brain that reacts to things. And so if you've done a lot of reacting, because especially with the pandemic and political strife and a lot of social unrest kinds of things, it keeps us in that fight, flight, freeze. Even COVID has kept us in that fight, flight, freeze because we are afraid of things that could happen because they happened already. So we're either thinking about what's happened before and it could happen again, or we're worried in the future about what could happen instead of being in the moment. So your brain is really feeling like it's on fire because it's just reacting and reacting, and your cortisol is so high. The important part is to be able to recognize it and allow it to shift to that prefrontal cortex where that reasoning, logic, and thinking is. That's the important piece. And it takes about 6 seconds to get there. The important part of that is if you're dehydrated, if you haven't slept well, it takes longer. So for those of you who are studying, for those of you who are presenting, for those of you who are doing procedures, it's so critical that you do prioritize your sleep and your hydration as the top 2 things. The third thing would be movement. So much is coming out about getting up and moving at least every 50 minutes. And being able to get at least 6,000 steps in a day. And those are intentional steps, not the meandering through, but actually walking. Those kind of things in your health and welfare and wellness are really important to help your brain power, to help your thinking, your logic, your ability to make a difference. So you have this reptilian brain that's firing so much because we're in this anxious state. And what can help that is just really four things. And I kind of alluded to them already. And one is being in the moment, to be able to take the 3 deep breaths, to take a moment, especially if you're moving very quickly. Let's say you're doing rounds or you're going patient to patient. When you do your hand hygiene, stop for a moment, take a deep breath, recognize where you are before you enter the next room, and to be able to leave what you just dealt with behind and take a fresh start. Same kind of things that you're doing when you're studying, when you're working with your family, whatever it is, to be able to stay in the present. And that's a really important thing, because you don't want that downward spiral that's going to induce fear and anxiety. It can be stopped actually almost immediately by taking that breath. And so take those one breath. That 3 deep breaths is actually the optimum to change a neural pathway. The other thing I mentioned at the very beginning is that green-gray in nature. So if you can look outside during the daytime, or if you can make a picture, whether it's on your phone as a screensaver or in the area that you study, something that you really enjoy, something that is of outside, is able to keep your brain in a calm state. That's a really important thing. And actually, if you're going to paint your bedroom, Sherwin-Williams came out with a green-gray color last year to kind of go along with the science of calming your brain. So they were right on it. Anything that helps you move, meditation, yoga, running, exercise, anything like that is so important to get involved in it. And even if it's just walking the 4th floor and in the big circle of including the academic facility all the way to the tower and all the way back a couple of times in a day, that would be excellent if you could do that, if you got a break and if you were able to take a lunch break or whatever and do some of that walking before you ate, because that would be even the best. The other thing is just naming the feeling of how you feel. And that's something they're working a lot with young children about, naming their feelings. And I think a lot of adults have a really hard time doing that. So when you think about it, like, how are you feeling? Are you feeling tired? Are you exhausted? Are you anxious? Are you worried? Are you happy? Are you sad? You know, what is the feeling that you're having? To be able to name it and then figure out what's underneath it. Are you angry? Angry is actually a secondary emotion. What is bringing up that anger? Is it disappointment? Is it embarrassment? What is it that's causing that? And so if you can actually give yourself a little time to figure out what those feelings are, you're actually able to help yourself by taming your brain and doing one of these things that we've been talking about. Yep. Can I go to 2? All right, so we do want to develop awareness of our own limits. And I think that's very important. And Dr. Shaw did talk about separating facts from assumptions. So you need to stop for a moment. If you're starting to feel anxious, to think about, is this really what's happening? Is this really what I'm hearing? Or am I assuming it based on things that I knew before? Slow yourself down, validate the feeling that you can be able to name. So, claim it to name it kind of thing. And to recognize that imposter syndrome is very common in students and students in the healthcare field because of how fast our field changes, that we feel like we have to keep up, and it's almost impossible to do that. And so to be able to give yourself some grace and be able to think about working with teams, getting some coaching, just even a mentor to help you kind of think through some of these things and process is so important. Dr. Shaw talked earlier about setting your goals and are they realistic? Maybe even sharing how you feel. How hard would that be to share that you weren't feeling perfect? And that might be it's a challenge for you to think about doing some of the things that wouldn't be comfortable for you in the past, to acknowledge your successes, take responsibility for successes and disappointments, to take that breath, to give a compliment, to positively scan. We do so much negative scanning about all the things that go wrong. We almost have to reteach ourselves how to positively scan. One of the ways to do that is 3 good things. You might have heard me talk about that before. You might even do it already, but it's finding 3 good things that happened in your day, writing them down at the end of the day. And writing is the important part of it, not just thinking of it, but actually writing it down, probably in a journal that somebody gave you as a gift that's in a sock drawer somewhere. Open it up, 3 good things every day for 14 days. At the end of the 14 days, you're starting to create a habit And you'll find earlier and earlier in the day, you're thinking about, oh, well, that's a good thing. One of the good things for me lately is sometimes my talks don't start till later in the morning. And I think, oh, I could come in later. But it really is much better for me to come in earlier because not only do I miss the traffic, but I also don't park on the roof. And that's a really good thing for me. So when I don't park on the roof, that's a good thing. So thinking about just one good thing that happened to you yesterday to kind of get yourself started. The other thing is look who's around you, who is takers and who is givers. There are people that are calm all the time, right? They just seem to deal with it very well. And there's people that are just irritable and stressed all the time. And you actually can catch it depending on where you are. So you want to find those people who are calm and kind of hang over in their area and get that feeling of that calm. And that's really good. So, and then if you can think of what gave you joy, those are kind of things that are important. Right. So if we start to shift the thinking, we've kind of given you some things that we want you to think about a little bit. And so if you were going to try to do that, could you honestly tell somebody that you were tired or you were disappointed or that you were sad? Think about some things that you might feel is a weakness if you were to share them, and then actually go to share them with somebody who would be a good confidant for you. Maybe you would allow silence to happen at lunch instead of trying to fill it with talk, to be able to be quiet for a little bit. Or instead of planning and over planning, try to spontaneously answer a question and see how that feels. Or maybe if you go to a new restaurant, you might have the routine of researching it, that you know everything about it, you've checked the menu, you know what you're going to order before you even go. What if you went to the restaurant without researching it and see how that felt? Maybe the first time it was very uncomfortable, you didn't know what you wanted, you ordered the wrong thing. Maybe the next time you try it again, and maybe the people at the table might give you some ideas. And so be able to allow yourself to have a little bit of that latitude. Then think about what you did well today. Just try some of those things to be able to create those attainable goals and take a more big picture kind of look at things instead of micromanaging everything in there.
And we want to acknowledge that this is hard. This isn't something that comes naturally to us. And maybe at some point it did come naturally to us when we were younger, but by being in the medical profession, all we ever talk about is, near misses, what went wrong, how do we not have that happen again, what complication did we have? And it's really hard sometimes to flip that script and look at things from a positive lens. And understanding that we have these tendencies, and understanding that we want to change that isn't easy work. We didn't get to where we are in medicine overnight, and we don't get to all of a sudden not check off any of those 11 things on the perfectionist scale overnight. It takes time. It takes the ability to see that it can be different, and it takes time for us to be able to want to be different with that. And when we walk into the arena, and when we're in there doing that dirty, gritty work of looking at ourselves and deciding who we want to be and having those bad days and then having those good days, the greatest critic that we face sometimes is ourselves. And understanding that, acknowledging that, and still continuing to do this work for our own satisfaction, our own joy, our own purpose, our own why is hard.
So to continue to strive for excellence, I want you to consider the power of and, A-N-D. When you're about to say but, see if you can switch it to and, right? So you are resilient and you need a break. You gave your all and you still needed to back out. You're independent and you still need others. You were sure and things have changed. You are kind and you have boundaries. Others have it worse, and your pain is valid. You did your best, and now you know more. See if you can kind of catch yourself when you do that. We have a couple of resources, and then what I'd like to do is just move into some of the resources we have here at Rush that might be able to help you if you are feeling like you would like to make some shifts in your life and some of the feelings of perfectionism, anxiety, the overwhelm types of things. And so you can go to Inside Rush /wellness to get to the website, and you can get all of these resources on the website. You could watch this video again and be able to catch these resources. One of the first things is the Well-Being Index. A lot of you already know about it. If you don't, you can use your phone with the QR code and go to the assessment. And what it does is it will immediately give you a score. It will also compare you to those in your area or in your community. And then it will invite you in a week or in a month to do it again. And once you have 3 data points, it will start to give you some acknowledgement and some recognition of ways that you might be able to shift some of your wellness and some resources that you can tap into. One of the things for anyone that is a nurse or going into nursing, there is a new program started, and Dr. Shaw is the main coach. She's the developer of this program for the Rush Nurse Coaching Program. And again, you're able to look at insiderush.rush.edu/wellness to be able to get to this and any of the other programs. We teach mental health first aid, and that's just like CPR for your mental health. It's good to know, it's good information for yourself, and then good to be able to apply it to others, especially in high stress departments that things are going so fast and they're very competitive. It's a very good thing to have. If your schedule would allow you, there are 8-week programs for mindfulness once a week for an hour for 8 weeks. It is free at this point. And so if you've ever wanted to dabble in mindfulness and your schedule allows you, this would be a very good thing to try. The physical space of the Center for Clinical Wellness is across in the Triangle building. This is the conference room. There are counseling rooms and offices in there, and it was built on donor dollars to be able to support the work that we do to provide the talks and all the programming that we do for you. At the center, there's counseling, coaching, and a lot of you know about the Energy Pot already, and you do need to make an appointment for it. It's a 20-minute appointment, but it's certainly well worth it. Any of the services that come from the Wellness Center are free to house staff, to students, to employees, and there's no session cap. So if you come in because you feel overwhelmed as you're going into an exam period or that you're about to present something and you just want some help with decreasing anxiety, but then you find out that you also would like a little help organizing things, or maybe prioritizing, or maybe there's some conflicts that have come up for you and you want to kind of deal with them better. So it doesn't matter how many different topics or how often that you're able to come back in. And that, I think, is just an incredible benefit to have. The center is open 7 to 7, Monday through Friday, both in person and online, which has been great for especially people that are 12 hours or students and working. Confidentiality and privacy are the primary focus of the design of this. Not only the design, but the way things are documented and the way things are scheduled. And so that's a really important thing to know, that that was thought about from the very beginning. And speaking of that, the Center for Clinical Wellness is what I was talking about on the left side. So it's unlimited free sessions for Rush community. But on the right side, we also work with ComPsych. So if you'd prefer to have a non-Rush provider, you would use the phone number that's on the screen. And they offer 5 sessions for free, and then it's shifted over to your insurance. The very unique part about this is it's available to immediate family members and significant others. So that's an incredible benefit again. So to be able to use either one of these services would be good. There's also a consult pager that within 60 minutes, you will get a response if you use the pager 852323. And sometimes you just don't know what you need. You're not feeling okay. And it's okay to not be okay. Just check it out with somebody. And so go ahead, use the pager. And even if it's a colleague of yours that you're concerned about, have them with you, use the pager, get the resources in the moment. And then the psychotherapist that answers that phone, that returns that call to you, and within the hour, will also give you resources for the next couple of days. So that's a really good thing to kind of keep in your back pocket about that. So all of our talks hit on the different pillars of wellness and well-being. Our hope is that we've been able to kind of hit all of that in this talk about achieving excellence and looking at redefining perfectionism in your life. And so just to think about some of the things that make that base of yours stronger is that sleep, that exercise, that nutrition, that you continue to do that so it really becomes a habit of wellness, and that you always practice gratitude. That's just such a wonderful thing. I know we are right up against our time. This QR code is for evaluation. And if anybody has any questions, to please go ahead and share any of those questions that you might have. We can end the recording. Thank you, everybody, for